portrayed it as individuals sometimes beating governments, but it's not necessarily that the individuals have better resources or more technical capabilities than the governments.
Definitely whenever this conversation comes up, like America just doesn't talk about it much, but I feel like we instigate and have the most sophisticated hacking that we like see globally.
This kind of software has the potential to infect everything in the world, but it's not used for that. The facial recognition, being able to track someone's itinerary from point A to point B, like having a system where you just like plug in a photo, it goes through a date, it goes through the footage of that day, and it'll tell you, okay, that person went from here to here.
So welcome everybody to Praxis. Welcome everybody. So today we have like an interesting topic. I'm not really educated on the topic itself, so I really need you guys to help me through, because I'm not gonna pretend that I'm some smart boy when it comes to hacking or something. And I think that sometimes it takes you gotta recognize where your flaws are, right, or where your limitations are. So this is one of those. That being said, welcome everybody. Welcome Elysium. Welcome J Chow Live, and welcome Neymannen. And thank you for coming on for Praxis. So every week we pick a topic. This week's topic is picked by J Chow. So J Chow, you can do an introduction on the topic itself, and then basically give your own opinion about it as well, and then we can have the other two panelists give their opinion. So J Chow, go ahead.
Yeah, so the reason why I picked this topic, hacking, is because of recent news of Anonymous, the hacking organization, international activists, that's kind of what they call themselves, maybe on Wikipedia, has been taking down government websites, especially recently the Russian website, because of what they're doing to Ukraine. They've also been targeting companies, releasing data, personal data, emails, and all sorts of stuff, trolling places like Russia Today, the state-backed TV outlet that is Russian. And so then this kind of brings up the question, should we as, well, private citizens, one, be concerned about the hacking organizations out there, private hackers that could be like malicious or something, kind of like there's like a hacker phobia a little bit inside of me ever since I decided to watch the TV show Mr. Robot. And then the second thing is, well, should governments be wary and afraid? There's kind of maybe this is like some pop culture thing, but private hackers always have like the edge over government security, apparently. And so like even though Russia is like regarded as the country that has the infrastructure for security as well as cyber attacks and whatnot, they're still vulnerable. Same thing with North Korea, Iran. Neyman is probably going to talk about Stuxnet. Hope I pronounced that right. That was allegedly. Yes. Yeah. I was pretty close. Okay. That was allegedly targeted against Iran, targeting their centrifuges. And it went all over the place. So then there's also that fear is when it comes to hacking, viruses, cyber attacks, is there a fear that it is going to go out of control to the point where everybody is affected? So yeah, those are like the three questions. Should we as private citizens be afraid? Should governments be afraid? And is this something that we should actually be cheering for, or is this something that we should be wary about altogether?
Yeah. Do you want to give your statement on that as well?
Yeah. I'm probably going to be more on the side of Chinchilla in that I'm not an expert on this. This is kind of just a fun topic that I thought of when looking at current events with what Anonymous is doing against Russia. However, I do know that there are a couple of people on this podcast that could talk about this extensively, and I'd like to listen to about it from them. As I said before, I have a little bit of hacker phobia, that my life is going to get compromised, my personal information is somewhere out there, even though I give it to companies either way. And that, or in the bigger fear, honestly, is that governments in which we kind of need them in order to function as a society are in a way, like in my mind, so vulnerable to hacking and these private hackers that could in pop culture with the press of a button ruin a lot of stuff. And so that is of a grave concern to me, in my opinion. So as private citizens, I think we should all be concerned about this. As countries should also be concerned about this. And yeah, we should all be concerned about this.
Okay, fair enough. Then next up are malware AI created by Japan. Elysium, go ahead.
True. Okay. One thing about the narrative around hacking that I find interesting is we talk about like Russia, North Korea, Iran, China as being like the premier hackers in the world, when really it's undeniably the United States. Definitely whenever this conversation comes up, like America just doesn't talk about it much, but I feel like we instigate and have the most sophisticated hacking that we like see globally can like repeatedly. So that's depending on how you feel about things, kind of where I frame a lot of the stuff. I feel like America instigates a lot of the cyber complexity, if we can say. The principle that I can have around civilian hacking is we live because no one wants to see the world burn. It's kind of like nuclear mutually assured destruction, but in the hands of private citizens, so potentially infinitely worse. But there doesn't the idea of a safe system does not exist, and that's kind of the core of the problem when we come to interaction within the civilian and like secret government spheres. Is there the idea that to be completely safe from hacking just is a fantasy? Even if you had a perfect system, the human component of any system is always vulnerable and very easily exploitable. As we see as like the main way to do hacking is not actually to like break through someone's system, it's to send phishing emails to employees of a system that will fuck up and give you access. So I guess my general stance is in all these accounts, we should probably be afraid, and it seems to be a big problem, and we kind of rely on people not wanting to see society fall apart.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was thinking about like the Kid Boga streams, you know, with the social engineering, that kind of stuff. Yeah. Next up, let's go to Name.
Yeah, so I was talking about a bit on stream while reading some articles. I have a very specific opinion on where this leaves us. I think that as technology allows individuals to be more and more dangerous to the systems that support the society around us, we are going to be faced with not just the abuse of our privacy and our rights, and as more and more there's more and more surveillance, but the justified abuse of our rights and our privacy, meaning that if an individual can, from one day to the other, decide to be a threat to society, then suddenly you're stuck with the conundrum of having to surveil your population, having to put in extremely invasive systems to make sure that individuals don't break things. And unfortunately, just like Elysium was kind of starting to point out, it is easier to break things than to build them. There is a permanent and inherent advantage to the attacker in any kind of cybersecurity dilemma. That is just undefeatable. That is why I understand why Jay Chou, for example, portrayed it as individuals sometimes beating governments, but it's not necessarily that the individuals have better resources or more technical capabilities than the governments. It's just that they have the attacker's advantage. You can never, like Elysium said, fully protect a system.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So yeah, that leaves the next question then. Are we just gonna doomer pill ourselves then because we never can protect us?
Yeah, that makes me more doomer pilled. That doesn't make me feel better.
So
okay, to
Make Jay Chow somewhat happier, Elysium.
Yeah, there's something I want to say, though, that should reassure you, though I don't know how convincing it'll be, but it's the reality. When you make a threat assessment as in any sort of IT situation, what you're looking at is you aren't just looking at covering all your bases to make you unhackable. First off, you're looking at who is going to attack you. What is your threat? The threat assessment, it has to be relative to how important your data is. If you're just a random citizen, your data is not worth like a super sophisticated government style attack, like there's like a super complicated worm like Stuxnet is probably not going to be planted on your devices, or if it is, it will probably be more by accident than because the NSA actually wants to listen into every single one of your phone calls. And if they really want to listen to your phone calls, they have other like simpler methods to do it anyways. But what I mean is that we as individuals, as private people who aren't involved with secret data, who aren't involved with government activities, the threat vectors that we have to pay attention to are those that threaten, for example, our finances, our bank accounts, our social media accounts. All those things are valuable to hackers, but they're not so valuable that they'll put into play six-figure or seven-figure costing attack resources to compromise us. We're going to have to look for phishing emails. We're going to have to be careful about downloading that weird binary off the internet and running it, etc., etc. So I hope that reassures you. Like you're probably not going to be under attack by the kind of stuff where this principle of never being able to make a defensive system complete actually applies. You just, or to put it another way, you know that saying, like if a bear comes running after you, you just have to run faster than the other person. When it comes to civilian hacking, hackers are opportunistic. If you're harder to hack,
you're really selling this. Like this is really optimistic. Just outrun a fucking bear.
No, you don't have to outrun the bear. You have to outrun the person.
Just don't be the richest person in the world. Okay, just be poor enough so that hackers don't actually want to hack you.
Yeah, being optimistic. You don't have to run away from the bear. You just have to kneecap the guy next to you. It's okay.
Exactly. No, what I mean is if the guy next to you is less careful with their cybersecurity, they are going to be a much better target for hackers than you are, and they're going to focus their efforts on reaching the low-hanging fruit because they make just as much money reaching the low-hanging fruit as they would hacking you, which is your best line of protection as a civilian, I would say.
No, Name's definitely right. No one's going to care about an individual private citizen to spend any time on anything. Yeah.
Listen, I don't plan on just being an ordinary individual private citizen just out there in the masses, okay? I'm trying to make it big out here in the real world, okay?
Mm-hmm.
So this also does not reassure me as much as maybe you guys make it out to be. But I'm definitely not as afraid of myself getting hacked as much as, say, like governments and their infrastructure, or say like electricity grids, nuclear reactors, or that getting compromised and then affecting wider society. That's probably my biggest fear. And as you guys said, this might be the reality that we have to accept. Doesn't really reassure me, kind of just doomer pills me more, as what Shachela was saying, is that attackers do have the advantage. Systems are always going to be vulnerable. And so then, like, what is the end game here? Like, we kind of just hope for the best, pray that like hackers are ethical.
So we can start with like the worst part of the doomer pill is I in my personal anticipation, the next time there is a massive terrorist attack that like shocks the world in a 9/11 style, it is going to come from a cyber attack on core human infrastructure. The reason that this isn't really seen is you only do that if you want to see society burn. So the people that are motivated to attack civilian infrastructure are very, very few. And even of like some super extremist terrorist groups, not very many of them are actually motivated to do that because they all have stuff that they want to defend too. No one wants like the retaliation of sending everyone out of the electronic era. So you have a very small group of people that actually want to see mass destruction. That's kind of the one hopeful principle.
I mean, there's few of them, but wouldn't you also say that it only takes one in order to burn down society?
Depending on how things play out, sure. Not like all
Like
society,
for
but yeah.
example, Stuxnet, and I read the Wikipedia article for it. I watched a couple of videos about it because that's Naaman told us to do a little bit of research. So I have a little bit of a background on it. But Stuxnet, even though it was, I want to say, obviously targeted against Iran and its nuclear centrifuges, was able to spread around to a number of countries, including the United States. And while it may not be activated because it needs like some sort of a purpose, some sort of a target, like some sort of a command or something, it still has, well, spread around, and I want to say not to the control of the people who sent out that attack.
Yeah,
And
so ironically, you can think of these things very similar to like pandemic viruses. If something is causing a lot of effects, even if it like has the mechanics to spread, it's causing so much noise that everyone's going to notice it. So the things about like Stuxnet's first initial spread and why you're talking about how it became so pervasive was because it had a very small target, and so it wasn't interfering with the places that it was spreading to. So if you think about it like an organic virus, if something's doing a lot, it's going to be noticed. If something's not doing anything, not actually affecting you, it can probably spread a lot before anything happens, or before people notice it. So there is like there is danger for things to be able to spread out of control, but the more damage something is doing, the more attention it's going to draw, and the more obvious like focus on stopping its spread will come.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
I wanna ask like Naaman then, because you're a software engineer and that stuff. So I wanted to ask like how likely the likelihood of like having a worm that spreads everywhere, is this like science fiction, or is this really normal? Like like how, because we think of science fiction, sometimes we think about time travel, we think about all these things, right? Some of these things are not possible at all. So yeah, that's my general question, like how likely, or the likelihood of like having worms that can exist on all the systems and that kind of stuff, is that even possible, or is that possible?
Theoretically, like we said earlier, anything's possible. And like an attacker can always find a vulnerability that was unknown before, by 0-day, etc., etc. As for how likely it is, I think it's kind of unlikely. It's something we've seen a lot of in the 90s. You could maybe kind of call like the 90s the sort of like golden age of civilian hacking, because you had the people who before then were the freakers, the people who are hacking phone lines to be able to call for free, and doing all sorts of stuff with the tone signals in the phones. There was a lot of cool stuff you could do with it. As much as the movie Hackers is complete nonsense, they actually do the references to freaking are actually like somewhat correct in that movie. But anyways, that aside, in the 90s, you had a lot of stories like that of random like teenagers getting really into like hacker communities and wanting to prove themselves to be like the best, and to do so, they were developing malware with no other purpose than to do as much damage as possible, to spread as much as possible. And then we had those kinds of situations where we had like a worm appear, it infects half the world in like a couple days and causes a bunch of problems, and then the patch comes out and it's fixed. But we did see that happen from time to time. Nowadays, what we do see happening is extremely sophisticated government-backed, or allegedly government-backed, malware being capable of that, but since it's government developed, it has very specific targets. I suggested while looking into Stuxnet, earlier today I discovered Flame, which was something very similar as well, also targeting like Iranian companies. A bit of a larger attack surface, but still very, very strict. Like it limited itself to 1,000 computers. those kinds of this kind of software has the potential to infect everything in the world, but it's not used for that. And the individuals who are hackers nowadays, who are civilians doing those kinds of activities, it seems like the culture has moved away from this sort of competition of wanting to like prove yourself by infecting as many computers as possible, towards just outright making money, ransomware,
True.
like stealing people's data, identity theft. All those activities are so lucrative that seems to be where all of the efforts are concerted. And then we go back to what we were talking about earlier, where the civilians' attack threat is more like phishing emails, maybe like not updating your OS in 5 years, so you have some old ass vulnerability that someone's going to use to hack you, stuff like that. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm hearing all these things. Sorry, Elysium, but
Go for it.
Okay. I'm hearing all these things about how, okay, most civilian hacking is not what we actually fear in popular culture, but something that I was referring to before was anonymous attacking Russian websites, government websites, Russia Today, and all that other stuff. So from the sounds of it, that seems to be a minority, but it also seems to be also very effective and also very dangerous, even in that regard. So I'm really curious, like, what do you guys have to think about Anonymous as like an organization? What do they typically do? And specifically on what they're doing against Russia.
Okay, before we jump on, or I really want to get to that, I'm going to do two quick things with Name was saying, and then we'll get to that for sure. One thing, the dick measuring contest between hackers now is like who has the biggest botnet instead of like who has the coolest code, because that's how you can DDoS the most people and stuff. So yeah, stuff has definitely shifted. And also, do you guys remember recently the Log4 shell vulnerability that came out?
No.
Like as an example, there was like a bug in a super common logging system that's been around for like years that no one had noticed, that was accessible to anyone, that could compromise any system that was running it. And this vulnerability came out, and it was like globally patched within like a month, I feel like. So like the good news is when vulnerabilities happen, the level of sharing of information and communication on a global scale is very fast. So like even if someone makes some crazy new virus that can take over the world, like people are going to react to it very quickly. Okay, now jump into Anonymous with Ukraine. This is like really new. Anonymous hasn't like done anything for like years and years. Like it's just been gone. And so like the idea of civilians attacking a country to this scale it is like a new phenomenon. So how the world reacts to it now is going to set a lot of the precedent, which is why this is actually super interesting. It is my first thought on the topic.
By the way, like I remember the Anonymous it did a while back. They don't think that was that long. They went on the dark web and they got rid of all the child porn over there. That was the latest thing that I can remember that Anonymous did. But that being said, like, is Anonymous? I think it's like a collective that everybody can call themselves Anonymous as well, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's not necessary. But yeah, for me personally, like Chow, when you ask that question, like I think it's just fake. It's just like I think that
Anonymous is fake.
No, it's just it's just these guys are. It can just say like, well, I could tomorrow if I'm becoming a hacker, I can just claim that I'm anonymous and then do some weirder shit, and then it's like, how does that work? Even it's like. But yeah, I guess just weird. But yeah,
sure. We don't have to the president of Anonymous.
Yeah, so like because Anonymous is going to be anonymous and decentralized, yeah, there's always going to be like weird claiming shit. But I think we can like reframe it as the idea of civilian hacking in relation to Russia and Ukraine, and we don't have to like care about Anonymous, because we can definitely see there's a unique element of a massive amount of civilian hacking going on against Russia right now.
Also, like, to be clear, sure, Anonymous is not a well-defined group, but they do have like recurring members There are
Sure.
groups of hackers that name themselves anonymous that will always work together and that will have their own like operational structures. And other hackers can also claim to be anonymous, but it's not like the anonymous nowadays is not the same people as the anonymous like 2 years ago, etc., etc. It may be, it might not be. You'd need to like investigate that in depth, but it's not like completely random either.
Okay. Yeah,
sure.
fair enough. That being said, like, would we cheer on like anonymous or cheer on like private hackers? That was like Jay Zhao's question. So, because like Elysium, you said like it's super interesting, but then I don't know. Are we supposed to cheer them on, or
I didn't want to. I was trying not to monologue, but no one else said anything, so I'll go for
Okay.
it. Yeah.
Go ahead.
Or what's the name? Do you want to say anything?
I have something to say. I'll go after you.
Okay. Yeah, so like right now they definitely have like public support, and it's gonna be very hard to see like if that's a good thing or not, and it's gonna be very hard to tell how effective things are until retrospect. Because right now just a bunch of data is getting dumped. Like the biggest one to me is the Russian central bank got 28 gigabytes of its like emails, bank records, transactions, and stuff dumped out there, and that's gonna take journalists like years to sift through to find if there's relevant things in there, because there's got to be like there's going to be so much information that's going to come out of this, but it's going to be so delayed that the public feeling towards this is being set in a positive light, and if that's a good or bad thing is not going to be like justified until like 5 years from now, I feel like.
okay, name?
Yeah, something similar. Maybe a bit more, a bit less optimistic. Like, sure, they dumped a lot of data, but then it all depends on how that data is exploited. They also dumped a bunch of like logins for government officials, and it's like, cool, yeah, like those logins can be useful somewhere down the line. Well, usually what you see when you have login dumps is that then you have people trying them out on every single other website and getting like an escalation into the person's identity, into their like cybersphere, or if I can like make up bullshit words. But the thing is, by itself, that data doesn't do anything. You need to exploit it further to get somewhere. Like what Elysium said, in those 28 gigabytes, very likely like at least 20 to 25 gigabytes of that is just normal operational like stuff that people have to sort through and be like, oh yeah, this is not interesting. And that's going to take a lot of time and work. And probably there is interesting stuff in there that, like you said, like journalists are going to kind of like when we have the Panama leaks and stuff like that, like 2 years later, a journalist finally finished going through it and is like, wow, those politicians have been embezzling money, etc., etc. But there's so much work that still needs to be done. It's like right now it has zero effect. Right, like strictly right now, nothing that they have done has accomplished anything of value. It's the further I'm being a bit harsh. Of course, it has value because
the
there's
leaks, we can ignore that. But they've been doing a bunch of wiping too. That definitely disruptive.
Which is another thing though, because something that's been a reality for a couple of years. I talked about ransomware earlier. We clearly know that ransomware groups, a lot of them are civilian, but a lot of them are government adjacent. I was just reading an article right now about a Russian and Eastern European ransomware group, for example, that they're clearly like civilian hackers, but also they have been doing missions that are in Russian interests. They specifically target, for example, U.S. hospitals for ransom. They also have there was a leak. Someone hacked their emails, and there's a leak showing that they were ordered by an unknown entity to collect data and compromise Bellingcat journalists looking into Alexei Navalny's poisoning. So clearly what we are seeing is that there are ties between the government looks at those hacker groups and sees them as tools that they can then exploit with plausible deniability, because they're just civilians. Like, oh wow, that's terrible. They hacked your hospitals. Damn, that sucks. Let's help you with that buddy. It's very easy to deny any involvement.
A lot of this internet stuff is like going by proxy, right? The same with like the Russian propaganda that's like basically like funded for 100% by, but it's a private entity. It's not the government, guys. So yeah, but Chichao.
Wait,
Hello?
what?
Yeah, does
What's
that
that?
answer your question that you asked earlier?
Well, yeah, I mean, like I get the answers from Elysium and Naaman, and it's good insight. It's good insight. This kind of does what Elysium said was a bit more positive. Naaman was a bit more pessimistic, and I think for some reason, and maybe this is just negativity bias, I feel like I lean more towards what Naaman was saying, in that like this could be used in very dangerous means. Yeah, what a great W, Naaman. We're in a shitty world in which anything could just fall apart with a press of a button. Yeah, fist pump in the air, go for it. So, yeah, that also doesn't make me feel better. Like Anonymous is they proclaim to be like for good, ethical, and whatnot, and I can't say as much as like with much confidence whether that's true. But what I also know is that if Anonymous exists and they're capable of doing X, Y, and Z, then there's a good chance that another group with different intentions, different motivations, and maybe not as much of a strong moral framework also exists to do some other bad shit. This makes me believe that technology was a mistake. We talked about social media before.
And
Yeah,
Prim Chow.
what a piece of shit. Okay, and okay, yeah, we have to go back. All right, we have to return to monk.
Okay. I don't think we should frame Anonymous as being particularly moral. I think we can say they have causes and they support those causes. But I wouldn't go out there and champion Anonymous as like a good moral actor.
I think also
But
That's why I said they proclaimed themselves to be.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
I can also assume that those guys can be anonymous by day and just be like random black hacker, black hat hacker by night, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
so that can be a thing as well.
I'm
So-
anonymous.
So you are. We all are. No, but Elysium, you wanted to say something? Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm super happy that Name brought up Panama Papers and stuff. Because another complication on top of like when you dump information, people have to sift through it for years, and then there's even another delayed element on top of that is people have to care to do something about it, or more specifically, governments. And like one of the most disheartening things about like the Panama paper releases is we've gotten a ton of amazing information, insights that the world would not have without them, and collectively all the governments of the world have been like, yeah, no. So like there definitely is like a lot of delayed elements to things.
Yeah, but that is also that you need to know that the data is legit, right? That's also like a concern that it's not altered or whatever.
Yeah.
Right. So I remember also like when it comes to the Dutch, we do like a lot of like with the cell phones, we do like massive amounts of cell phone taps, and then afterwards when some terrorist attack or something occurred, then it was like, well, we already knew this if we had actually looked into the data. So they did cell phone tap that dude, but they didn't use that data. And the same thing goes with like the British cops that I know of, that they have like a that they tap a whole neighborhood if they think there's like terrorist like activity. Then they have all this data, but the issue there is that you still gotta refine that data, right? So yeah, I'm not quite sure what you guys think about that, but I will give it back to the name. So
Yeah, that is something that China has been working a lot on because, as we know, all know that China is one of the biggest surveillance states in the world, and they have recognized that issue that they have too much data to sort through. I actually, when I was in China, one of the most surprising things, considering the level of surveillance you live under there, drug dealers use WeChat Pay to like collect their money. That's the level of no fucks given. They
how do you know that? Just
friends, anonymous sources.
kidding. Yeah.
No, but that's fascinating to me because you're looking at an app that's like owned by the Chinese government that has a clear like open book auditing like services for the Chinese police and the Chinese services. Nothing you do on WeChat is private at all, and it's a billion people. How are you going to find that needle in the haystack? So what China has been doing, and which probably is going to be the future of surveillance technology, is neural networks. They've been investing very, very heavily in AI-driven solutions for sorting through the data. For example, for their camera system, they've been working on extensive facial recognition, being able to track someone's itinerary from point A to point B, like having a system where you just like plug in a photo, it goes through a date, it goes through the footage of that day, and it'll tell you, okay, that person went from here to here, then to here, like splice all the video together so you can see what they were doing for a day. Stuff like that is I think what they're working towards. I don't know how close they are to that because it's China. It's hard to sift what's propaganda, what's not. Their claims are that they like already have that technology. It's hard to really tell what the actual status is of it. But no, humans are never going to be able to sift through all that data. It's impossible.
Yeah. So something that kind of informs me a little bit what you just said, kind of a hint, is when I think about the NSA and how people say, that our government, they're spying on us and they're tapping our phones, they're tapping our webcams. Hi, U.S. government. Hope you can see me. But then I think about, well, what they actually have to do is they have to search for you particularly, if I'm not mistaken. And so they kind of have a system in which they really could, I guess, surveil everybody at once, but they don't have like the logistical manpower in order to do that. Kind of like what you guys were saying about, hey, there's so much data, it's going to have to take years in order to sift through all of it. Which makes me kind of less wary about like the government surveilling me, because like, what is the chances that an NSA agent is actually looking at my webcam right now?
Well,
There's like everybody has like one FBI agent assigned to them. Right?
Yeah, exactly.
That's how
There
it
you go.
works. So,
I think so. We're getting a little tangential, but I think this does bring up two very explicit dangers to me. One is, this all is going to be automated, and so how that automated system works, functions, like what its goals are and stuff, and how it processes like people's information is like very important at what the world is going to look like. So that's like pretty crazy. But like to what you're saying, Jay Chow, the ability to store all of your past actions and then go, hey, this person's now a target, and be able to look back at everything you've done that we've gathered, I think is the bigger concern when it comes to American privacy or legality. So just because like everything someone does is being stored and not actively looked at doesn't mean that they can't go back and look at that at some point.
is it even possible to store all the data if you wanna...
Yes.
Yeah.
One of the worst reports that is continuously held true, and this is like 10 years ago now, is that the government was increasing its storage by orders of magnitude every year. And there is a lot of data there, but if that's like data you want to store, you can.
So when it comes to the US, like, what are the rules around like storing data? Because I thought it was like they can keep like data around for like 3 years or something. I don't know. In the US, it's pretty long, but or is that? Would you guys know?
I don't, sorry.
I don't think they have any limitations, really.
Yes, the problem with this too is this is already in a legally like unspecified or illegal area. So the idea that there are like some limits, because especially the workaround for a lot of stuff is like, oh, we're just storing the metadata indefinitely, which is like enough to have the same level of information or insight on a person in the most cases.
One thing I would like to add, though, as well, as far as the storage of data, or like what you're bringing up, being able to, maybe you do something suspicious and then they look into your past. This is something people often misunderstand when it comes to privacy, which is very annoying as someone who's involved with computers to have to explain every single time. Like, yes, as long as you don't commit a crime, in theory, you have nothing to hide. You shouldn't care. In theory, like there's this argument, you shouldn't care about your privacy that much. But the problem is that the government has shown time and time again that it can and will misconstrue facts, and in fact can very, very easily prosecute you off of circumstantial data and ruin your life for things that even though you're completely innocent. It can be as simple as like a murder or robbery investigation, and your like phone geolocalization shows that you were near the incident, and they don't have any other suspects, no one else appears on cameras, etc., etc., and suddenly you're the prime suspect. And suddenly, like the burden of proof in the whole justice system is working against you, because now you have to prove your innocence, which is not how it's supposed to work. Those are things that lawyers warn people about, and those are very, very big dangers to our freedoms, honestly.
Yeah. So go ahead, Joe. Go ahead.
Yeah, so this kind of reminds me of what Elysium brought up before, in that he believes in the future, governments are just gonna turn into surveillance states in order to accommodate for the security risks of ever increasing hacking capabilities. And if this is the case, then are the privileges that we have before been privileged to and are privileged to now, freedom of speech, not getting surveilled on, we have innocent until proven guilty. You can't just come into my home and investigate. I'm forgetting what that's called, Lamau. It feels as though
stuff, yeah.
Probable cause, yeah, exactly, yeah. You have to have a warrant, okay? Can't just get something from the judge. Can't just like spy on me. It feels as though those rights and liberties are just in the future, if Elysium is true, is gonna go away. And this is probably of like grave concern to us liberals, the Praxis, Lamau. But the upside is that, this is what we have to do because of increasing technology, and we have to secure ourselves. Even
okay,
if
name one of the
is
police
at the
state, not me. Just to
of
clarify.
privacy. Oh, it was maybe?
Yeah, it was me talking about the increased surveillance as a natural
Oh, I'm sorry,
consequence.
Elysium. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So I personally think that what Dame is saying, like the pressure on the rights, we can definitely see that happening already. Like, I know an exact case where they basically pinpointed somebody, and because of the fact that his history was being in like he was breaking into houses, so he was already arrested for that in the past. And then they saw like the location and saw his mobile phone, so they could like geo pinpoint him. And then it was like they weren't like making his he wasn't like the suspect or something, but they invited him on the police station to talk about something, and then they tried to get him to like actually confess something that they didn't have any proof for whatsoever. That being said, like I don't think that the rights uh, are going to disappear, but I'm definitely seeing like some there is more leverage from the government to actually like do stuff, right? So
Yeah.
yeah, that's concerning.
Just to balance things out, to be fair, as much as I've been a bit doomer about like the future of our rights, this whole talk, we have seen pushback. We have seen, even though there are problems with its implementation. The GDPR effort in Europe has been a sign that it's possible to pass laws that further the cause of the opposing cause of privacy and control over our data, as opposed to just relinquishing it all to governments, etc. So that can also be that can also happen.
Mm-hmm. I'm a big privacy fan. I think Jay is bringing up like I hate that we referenced this twice now. The Patriot Act dilemma, the post 9/11 dilemma of security versus privacy. And in general, I feel like we should fall on the privacy end of things.
Yeah, but that being said, like we have all these new tools as like private citizens, right? Shouldn't the government have tools as well? So
I don't think the government's lacking in any of its tools to investigate cyber crimes for the most part that are domestic for sure. I guess I haven't seen anything where if an investigation into a domestic crime wanted to happen that it couldn't. I guess I could be wrong there.
Yeah, I was gonna say there's one area that is contentious. It's encryption. If you guys don't know, I think it was until 94 or 95, I don't remember the exact year it got repealed, the US considered encryption to actually be a military technology. As such, if you are, it was illegal, for example, to carry an encryption algorithm over outside of the U.S. Or notably, one of the main biggest researchers in the 80s of encryption and developer of algorithms saw himself, for example, have problems going on vacation outside of the U.S. because in his brain he contained military technology. But like that's funny. But the reality is, what we're seeing nowadays when we have true encryption, because also what followed just to illustrate this whole situation, the NSA released, supposedly worked on an encryption algorithm that they then released to the public, but that was closed source. And it turned out that this encryption algorithm that they released had a backdoor in it that allowed the NSA to decrypt anything encrypted with it. They lost all credibility with the cybersecurity community over that. Following that, the cybersecurity community in general has very strict principles of what constitutes good encryption. It needs to be open source, which allows it to be audited. And the auditing will allow us to determine whether it's vulnerable to common attack vectors, etc., and allows you to compile it yourself in a safe manner, so that you know that the code you're running is exactly the code you audited.
Yeah, but speaking of encryption and how like that could be used in order to protect our data from vulnerabilities, my assumption is that, as a layman talking about this, is when you encrypt something, you're basically saying in order to access this, you have to have a code, and this code could be really, really, really long. And depending on your like computer or whatnot, it might take like a couple million years in order to get that code, in order to get the data, which kind of also raises the prospects of, well, criminals also using encryption to their advantage, so that the government or police, FBI, whatnot, is not able to as effectively crack down on their cases.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was getting at. What we've seen, for example, is the U.S. government has time and time again asked Apple to open up the encryption on the iMessage system. Telegram and Signal have been under constant pressure from governments all across the world, Australia, UK, some other governments, to open up their end-to-end encryption to allow them to monitor the messaging activities on those apps. And we know that those apps are used by terrorist groups, by criminal organizations, because they have this reliable end-to-end encryption. That means that even the companies themselves, even if they monitor everything going through the server itself, all the data going through the server is already encrypted. They have no access to whatever the users are sending to each other. So you have kind of this, but the flip side of this is when you go the like old school NSA approach of backdoors and not allowing encryption. Some countries don't allow encryption past a certain key length, etc., etc. You also open up your companies, for example, to industrial espionage, to their own encrypted communications being decrypted by a bad actor or by a foreign government's actors acting in the foreign government's interests, etc., etc. So it's not as clear cut. Like the terrorists will use the good encryption, but so will the companies whose secrets you want to remain protected. So will the legitimate citizens whose secrets you want to be protected. The same encryption protects our banking data and our passwords when we authenticate online, etc., etc. So like right now the consensus in the security community is that we need to keep encryption alive, that it is not only a guarantor of our privacy and our rights, but also if we allow governments to break our right to encryption, we end up vulnerable to any bad actor, whether it's a civilian or a governmental bad actor.
Mm-hmm. Governments also like have access to subpoenaing these companies. They're not like helpless. But sorry, keep going.
Okay, so yeah, okay. The United States could subpoena and they could get the information that way, sure. Without having to need a backdoor.
No, you're not going to get like the chat logs, but you can get information about who's in these groups, where is the location and stuff. Like you can get the surrounding information. Like you're not, like you're just going to not know anything. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, just to be clear, end-to-end encryption means like none of that is accessible. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, so something that you said earlier, Naaman, about like, okay, if the government asks for a backdoor to companies, then that leaves those companies vulnerable to other actors like going through that access as well.
Yeah.
So just the existence of a backdoor makes it vulnerable not just to the government, but anybody else who could get to that backdoor.
Yeah, so to put it in another way, like we talked about the attacker advantage, right? It's so hard to keep a system secure. Imagine now that you like imagine it like a house. You make sure your house has an alarm, has locked doors. You put like several locks. You reinforce your doors, etc., etc. But then someone tells you, yeah, you know what? I need you to leave the window open. And it's like, sure, someone passing in front of the house, someone trying out the front door, they'll see it's like well protected. But then if they know that the window's like unlocked, then they can open it. And then you no longer have actual security. You only have obfuscation of an access point. And sure, the access point will be obfuscated. Like it'll be maybe a secret code that only the NSA knows. But what if the NSA gets compromised? Like what if they leak the code? Or what if someone discovers it by accident? There are like a million different ways where this can go terribly, terribly wrong.
Phishing email.
Yeah, absolutely.
Elysium?
I mean, I'd like to bring it back more towards about Russia, Ukraine, if that's cool with you guys.
Yeah, sure.
Because I do think we are witnessing something more of like a new phenomenon in how robust the civilian versus civilian, or more like civilian versus industrial side of Russia is right now. There have been like multiple Russian companies that have had their computers hacked, information leaked, ransomware put on them. So like the amount, it's going to be interesting to see in retrospect the amount of like industrial cost, or there's another word I'm looking for, but I can't think of it, that this causes, and it like if that's significant, or what the Russian reaction to it will be. Because so far what I've seen from the American side is to just like not talk about it yet. And I don't see Russia bringing it up very much either. But I think it's going to be something that comes up a lot afterwards. Does that make any sense, or what do you guys think?
Okay.
Yeah, it is kind of startling that like I haven't really been seeing a lot of news regarding like, hey, Anonymous is doing this. This is kind of like messed up, or this kind of implies all the vulnerabilities. They kind of just report, oh, Anonymous does this, and it's just like really good because Russia Today gets fucked, and then everybody cheers, right? So it is kind of concerning, and that like maybe as like a country, both government news as well as public opinion, we've kind of just been chilling with what is like the highs of what's going on right now. But I'm just thinking about, well, what does this imply? Oh no, this is a really bad future, the way that I'm thinking about it, at least.
If it escalates, yeah, for sure.
Yeah, it is really concerning. I really do hope that this is a conversation that happens more so in the future. I'm also just concerned that public opinion has kind of already poisoned the well of, well, Anonymous was doing something good because it was against Russia, so let's have them do more things, right? That could also have a lasting effect. when it does come to, I guess, what is going to be the responses from governments, in which I do think there is going to be one, at least when Iran got affected by Stuxnet back then. It came out that Iran like really invested into their like cybersecurity. Like they apparently had the largest team, or like the most sophisticated something, like the number 2 in the world, probably behind Russia, in order to like prevent other attacks, in which allegedly they came out saying that yeah, there was a similar attack in like 2018, and they say that they were able to stop it. I have no idea if that's true or not. But this kind of makes me think of the security dilemma, in that like, yeah, governments could use attacks to each other, and if the idea is that, oh, we have an edge against them and we're going to coerce them and we have pressure over them so that they could do what they want, which is us like trying to shut down their nuclear program, stopping their centrifuges. Instead, their reaction is going to be, no, we're not going to give in to the bullying. We're not going to make ourselves vulnerable. We're actually going to invest into our own cybersecurity. And when they invest into their cybersecurity, what that also means is they have increased their capabilities of doing attacks from themselves. I don't know if that's the same thing or not, in that like if you have good defense, it also implies that you have good offensive capabilities. I don't know if that's true in the cyber world.
It is.
I don't know if I'd agree with that. Well, it doesn't matter. Sorry, keep going, Nim.
No, I
Well,
just want to confirm
like-
it is true. It is true. But sorry, go ahead.
Wait, but so then, okay, this is a good debate. Elysium says it's not true, but you say it is true.
Yeah.
Fight.
Yeah, or what do you mean by that,
Okay.
Neyman?
Look, if you're a cybersecurity researcher and you're like exploring attack vectors, you have to be able to play the red team. You have to be able to play the attacker. And to play the attacker, you have to know the techniques, the attack vectors. You have to know the tools. You have to be a hacker. If you're a cybersecurity researcher who's not a competent hacker, you're a bad cybersecurity researcher. There's like no two ways about it. Obviously,
Okay,
the daily skill sets are maybe going to be a bit different. You're going to be more into analysis, post-attack analysis, and more into like theory crafting, like potential attacks, etc., attack vectors against yourself. But you need to have the full skill set of a competent hacker.
Sure. Or I guess, I mean, I definitely agree with that. I think the difference that we're thinking about is like defending against attack vectors is going to be very different than like making ways to attack those things.
Yeah, like the solutions you
practice,
create are different,
Cool.
but the skills involved are the same. So someone who is involved in defense can flip around and become a competent attacker.
For sure. I think the conversation around this highlights that there aren't like any real international rules around hacking. And I say real there because we make like some, but literally no one follows them. The most like competent or sophisticated international rules around hacking that I know of have to do with intellectual property. And that's primarily because that's what developed nations are going to care about. They're going to care about their companies getting their data stolen and defending against that in an international stage. And no one wants to have, in my opinion, any rules around hacking yet. And the ones that we have made and semi-agreed to with the United States, there was like one cybersecurity conference or something that got agreed to by a bunch of Western nations and no one else. No one actually follows them.
So there's a couple things I would like to add to that. A NATO spokesperson. There was like a NATO conference in the first week of the war. They have a NATO spokesperson. I forgot their name. Confirmed that NATO is willing to consider cyber attacks as a trigger for Article 5. Which I found as a fascinating statement, because there is no clear definition of what a cyber attack is. So to me, it's an extremely weak statement. I think
very, yeah.
Yeah, I think the power of Article 5 is deterrence. And if your adversaries don't even know what can or can't trigger Article 5, then it's not a deterrence, actually. And the second big problem is, we've talked about it earlier, there's always plausible deniability in cyber warfare. It's so easy to put into place. It's so hard to find decisive proof of actual governmental incrimination that I don't know how feasible like a rule of law is when it comes to the question. And finally, the biggest, also one of the biggest problems, and this is something allegedly Obama's administration was regularly bringing up when Obama continued the Stuxnet project he inherited from George Bush, was that this is going to make them hypocrites. I mean, this is not hypocrites, but this is an escalation. The U.S. was set a precedent for cyber warfare that now is going to be the standard for all other countries. Why should Russian hacking groups not consider ransomware against U.S. hospitals when the U.S. has like this really sophisticated attack that can, et cetera, et cetera. Like now everyone, it basically opened Pandora's box in a certain sense, and like,
sure.
yeah, it's a problem.
And to build on that, when Jay Chow was talking about Ukraine building up its cyber defense and stuff, when you send a virus to infect someone's machines, they essentially have a copy of that virus at the end of the day. You don't you don't get to take it back. You've put the attack vectors that the ways to circumvent security systems, the way that into that virus, and they can figure that out. So in addition to letting someone know that they need more cybersecurity, you've given them something to analyze to learn how to attack you back in a similar fashion. So if you would do a very complex attack at someone, the complexity of their attacks back at you is going to increase as they study your attack and learn from it. And in retrospect, that's one of the things that people have talked about a lot with Iranian hacking, is we've probably provided a bunch of information and complexity to future Iranian attacks that they could be taking more advantage of. When we've seen a little bit of it, I think they attacked Saudi Arabia in a similar fashion to some of the stuff that we used against them, by repurposing it and attacking the Saudi oil companies and wiping a bunch of their information. I can't remember the year off the top of my head, but I could look it up real quick.
Okay.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I was just going to add, like, there is a caveat to that, is that vulnerabilities are the most powerful when they're only known by a single person. That's what we call 0 days. And so, for example, Stuxnet had 4 different 0 days that were collected by the authors of the worm. Probably, honestly, that's a tangent. I'll go get to that later. Those vulnerabilities, once they're used and analyzed by security researchers across the world, they're going to be patched. So suddenly you can continue using those vulnerabilities. Like Lysium said, the Iranians, at the very least, they can learn from how the worm is structured, how it was developed, etc., etc. And there's a lot to learn from that. There's no denying that. That'll make them much better hackers. But the specific vulnerabilities used, they'll only be able to use them against unpatched targets who have not been protected against them once they've become widely known. So that obviously limits a bit the reuse of attacks.
Mm-hmm. This is in 2012 when they attacked Saudi Arabia.
Okay.
Another element to this, though, is especially when we talk about infrastructure, these machines are often the lowest grade complexity machines, the oldest operating stuff out there, that aren't going to be getting any updates to them once they're out. So in terms of defending the stuff that we care most about, it's typically probably some of the most vulnerable hardware there is, and really relies on the principle of no one wants to lose all of their civilian infrastructure.
To be clear, it's not like the industrial controllers are connected to the internet. What you're patching in that situation is you're patching the computer that they use to control the industrial controlling hardware. Obviously, like you said, the industrial controlling hardware, that's going to be an old ass system that's just bought because it's reliable, and no one wants to change what isn't broke, and it has no security, no security at all built into it. But where you do have a layer of security is in how you program the industrial controller itself. The computer that you connect to it, that's the one you need to keep patched, you need to keep up to date, you need to keep it air gapped, you need to keep watch who has physical access to it, because that's another big principle in security. Anyone who has physical access to your device, you have to assume that they've been able to compromise the device. Their physical access is always leads to compromise, but that's neither here nor there. Oh yeah, speaking of 0 days, there's something I wanted to mention as well. When it comes to contact between the government and civilian interests, something that companies are very suspected of doing, like we talked about backdoors earlier, they're suspected of selling 0 days to government agencies to allow them to develop those extremely sophisticated attacks. There are articles suspecting Apple of, for example, having collaborated with the Chinese government in not patching a vulnerability over several years that allowed them to basically identify Uyghur iPhone users. There are some articles about that.
Huh.
That's fucking crazy.
Yeah.
Apple.
Yeah. I look. You want to know the funny thing? I was talking about Apple not willing to open iMessage encryption to the U.S. government, and there are very good arguments for that. Apple has opened iCloud encryption in China. If you're using iCloud in China, the Chinese government has access to your iCloud, even though in the rest of the world it's properly encrypted.
Okay.
China has been able to leverage its the fact that it can close its market off to a company to basically strong arm those companies into compromising their security solutions.
China is a big market.
Yep.
Okay.
It's definitely a problem.
Sorry?
So it's definitely a problem. Yeah.
Yeah. I would definitely see that as a problem. Yeah, I was thinking about a couple of things. Like I was thinking about like the thing that you mentioned as well, named the possible like deniability. Like I don't think that we can outsource our nukes and then give them to a private company and shoot them up in the air, and then but the difference there is like obviously like with like these hacks, or the attack just overall is just way different, and how to even approach that we don't really know. So the person who says like that NATO 5 should be enacted when there is like a cyber attack, I think that's kind of silly, because yeah, it's like I don't necessarily think that we should like say that in the first place. Should that be even the case? I don't know, because then can still like imagine having an American company doing something to like the Chinese government or something. Are we at war now, or how does that work? Right? Like I think this, yeah, this, it's just an overall like interesting question, but so yeah, but how should we deal as like governments around the world with like cyber attacks in general? That would be my question, and maybe you guys could give like a prescription, something that we can actually do as like or some law or some idea that we should
I mean, I guess
enact.
the problem is to say how should we deal with it is like the question. The current thing is there are no actual rules. It is up to everyone to interpret how they want, because there's no international standard, and so that
Yeah,
has to be
okay.
made in some way.
And now you're God Emperor of the world. So go
Okay.
ahead. So go ahead. What would be solutions?
I think the only thing that super makes sense to me is you have to build off of the small precedent that we have now of there is always plausible deniability, but you can sometimes show where an attack originated from. And domestic security agencies or governments have to be responsible for taking care of hacks that happen or that originate from within their nation. As this small precedent that we currently have of if a hack happens, you go to that nation and you say, hey, this hack happened from here, and it's up to that country's law enforcement to deal with it. And so that has to be expanded out into a bigger precedent that has consequences when governments don't prosecute hacks within their country.
Okay. Interesting. Name?
I would like to add another problem with plausible deniability. It's that we haven't mentioned yet. It's very, very easy to make a cyber false flag attack. You could release a worm, and hey, you compile it with a Russian compiler. We throw in some Russian language into the code, and suddenly it looks like it was developed by Russian hackers. And you can play, and that will play, like, if you release it now with the current situation, that will play into the whole like anti-Russian sentiment, etc., and maybe you can obfuscate the real source of the attack. I think that's important to remember, because even with like investigating cyber attacks, like other than worms, IPs can, like, a server might be located in the US or in Russia or in Iran or anywhere else, but the server itself, unless you get physical access to it, unless you can actually consult the connections it's made and the software it's running, either the server is the real endpoint, or maybe it's just a proxy, and maybe the real server is located in, I don't know, South Korea. And so, like, once again, those investigations need to be handled very carefully. As for a general, like, rule of law perspective, I do agree with the Elysium statement that we should have a standard where, when a cyber attack occurs, you can go to the government where you suspect the cyber attack to have occurred and expect them to run a good faith investigation into the issue, and say, like, you track down the connection to a server in the country, and they can maybe seize the server in the data center, investigate it, and either the attack did originate from the country, or it's connected to another server, and the investigation continues. But that only works with good faith actors, which we now know Russia is not. When it comes to bad faith actors, I think there's just no recourse. Honestly, the only recourse is to strengthen the cybersecurity of your nation's companies, of your nation's infrastructure, which is extremely hard. Like, once again, there's the attacker's advantage, but that's all you can do, and that's what we should do.
Okay, and then Cham?
Well, it just feels like there are no good solutions to this, even if I become God Emperor. Like, the solution would be to, we're all one country, so we're all one people, so we don't attack each other in the first place, because we're one big happy family, peace and love. Am I right, or am I right? To talk about, like, what Elysium solution is, which is, if it actually works, that would be pretty ideal. If our countries actually did follow up on, well, hey, there was a cyber attack, seems like it originated from your country, can you deal with it? And they would be like, no, didn't come from us. It's fake news. You're lying. You're lying. As I'm pretty sure that's what Russia has done a couple of times, as well as other countries as well. So that's a flawed system in which not a good solution. Nothing against you, Elysium, but this is just a tough problem in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
And then what Naaman said, which I'm forgetting off the top of my head, but I also think there are problems as well. Naaman, can you shortly explain what was your solution?
I said, like, once you're dealing with bad faith actors, the only solution is to strengthen the security in your country, create standards for cybersecurity, industry standards. There are still, like, the problem is there's still low-hanging fruit in key companies and key infrastructures, companies that don't properly implement correct protocols, correct disclosure, correct auditing. Those are all things that can improve an entire company's safety against those attacks.
Got it. So that there's also a problem in that too, is that, like, even if, like, say, to private hackers, they're going to go for the low-hanging fruit, obviously, so they're probably not going to try to deal with companies in, like, the United States, even though they actually might be capable of doing it. It's just going to be a bit harder. But if you're Russia and all of a sudden you see United States beefing up its defense, then what Russia is probably going to do is try to beef up its own offense. What I'm trying to get at is that sort of prescription risks leading to escalation, in that Batman quote, we start wearing Kevlar and they start wearing body armor. We start carrying rifles, and all of a sudden they have, like, armored tanks. You guys know about that, but yeah, like, that's the problem of escalation, which I fear. this also isn't a perfect solution, but just something to think about, and which is what Russia alleges what they're doing is creating like their own decentralized internet. And I don't know much about the subject to say if whether that's like a good solution or a bad solution. What I do know is that like that it's gonna not interact with the rest of the internet, and that's pretty bad for Russia because all of a sudden they don't got Netflix and they don't got like all the other stuff that we do, which is like
Facebook is
really
banned.
awesome. Good. Fuck it. I might move to Russia. Facebook is banned.
Yeah.
Lit.
What the fuck?
I'm just kidding. Just kidding. Yeah. So then, like, I'll be really interested to hear about what you guys have to say about the decentralized internet. Is it good? Is it bad? Like, what does it actually mean?
I want to first do like a bit of a rebuttal to the well, I guess to your rebuttal to my idea of like increasing defense. I understand this idea of like in the classical security dilemma, what you're describing is true, that better defenses do imply a better offense. We see that, for example, in mutually assured destruction. If a country develops a way to reliably intercept ICBMs, they suddenly are no longer vulnerable to nuclear first or second strike, and suddenly they can be the aggressor. They actually have a heads-up advantage over anyone else in the nuclear field. And this what looks like just a defensive measure on paper is actually an offensive measure in the power balance in the security dilemma. When it comes to hacking, it's a bit different. Like the way cybersecurity handles those questions is basically paranoia is the underlying sentiment. You have to assume that you're trying to develop systems in a way where they can handle the most bad actors possible. There will always be flaws. There will always be, like Ezium said, even a perfect system will still have a human component that can be a vulnerability. But you try to minimize it as much as possible by thinking of like all the possible things that bad actors can do. So when it comes to like what I was saying about or what I was prescribing, having companies strengthen their cybersecurity through, for example, legislation, forcing them to enact proper auditing, proper industry standards, and like publicly submitting to those regulations. Is something that will, sure, it will not stop a determined effort by like the Russian government. If the Russian government wants to hack them, they'll still be vulnerable. But even then, you have to go into the cost of those attacks. Something like Stuxnet is extremely expensive, not just in raw money and the manpower needed to develop it, such a sophisticated attack. It's also an opportunity cost. Those 4 zero-day vulnerabilities that are invested in Stuxnet, they can never be reused for any kind of operation on that level against such a high-profile target. You need to find other vulnerabilities to use in further operations. You burn them, literally. As such, when lower importance targets increase their security, they actually are safer.
Okay. Yeah, I find that interesting because of the fact that you say like we need to have like companies with like higher standards and that kind of stuff, because to basically to when it comes to like these massive countries that can attack and that kind of stuff, there's no defense in that sense. But when we have like private hackers and that kind of stuff, that might be like useful because of the fact that he said like, well, they need to invest like a lot of time, money, whatever,
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that's one interest, and I think also when technology moves along, right, you will have like more complexer stuff and that kind of shit. So that being said, like I think this Chow, like you were mentioning this arms race, right? When it comes to cybersecurity, I think that will keep on happening because of the fact that if you don't keep up with that arms race, then you make yourself more vulnerable to even like these private hackers.
I'm gonna throw down my completely unjustified personal take on this. I don't think there's any parity in the hacking sphere. I think America has showed that it is the predominant hacker in the world. Its cyber technology is always been ahead of everyone else around the world, and I don't see that changing anytime soon. And if that did change, we would see an actual drive to have international standards around hacking. And as long as we don't, I think that signals that America comfortably feels that it is leagues ahead of everyone else when it comes to the hacking capabilities. So like the idea that this is analogous to a Cold War, to some degree holds true, but I don't think anyone is close. I don't think anyone, if it gets into it, is going to be able to compete in the hacking capabilities that the NSA like currently has and deploys. I think we've demonstrated this. We might not be as public as China in our automation processing yet. Who knows? Because that is like a black box that we don't talk about. We don't talk about any of our hacking. But our ability to gather data has already been shown to be insanely I forget the word, but like insanely capable to capture every piece of data in foreign countries that we're like in conflict with and copy it is something that we've like unofficially disclosed we are capable of doing in Iran and previously in China and in Iraq and stuff like that. And like the security net that we threw over the entire Middle East during the war on terror is like an insane feat to think about, of a foreign nation having better access to other nations' information and data than that nation does of its own. It's all, I don't know. I don't feel like there is a level playing field, and if there was, America would be reacting differently.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
this kind of does suggest is that, well, bad actors do exist. America is the top dog, and America is going to be the one who will leverage it for their own interest. Kind of suggests to me that like there is going to be an arms race, but maybe on like one side of, well, other countries want to heavily invest in this in order to either like counter America or like even attack America if they so wanted to. Which kind of leads me to believe is that like every single time when I think about the security dilemma, and it seems to be that most people want to feed into it because it's a positive feedback loop, and like the knee-jerk reaction to do so is what is the problem, in my opinion. Like I always kind of default to, well, have we ever considered like some sort of a détente? Like during the Cold War, we were able to normalize relationships to the point where we didn't just like each respectively increase our own stockpile of nuclear arms to the point where we could destroy the world a couple times more, and then within the next 10 years it's like, okay, well, we now doubled it, so we're now gonna we now have the capabilities of destroying the world more a couple times more. And so then like when it comes to like cybersecurity, if the United States doesn't have an interest to like pursue some sort of détente because, well, there's just like leagues ahead, then to me the outcome is, well, other countries are going to try their best in order to get onto the same level playing field, and that's bad because I don't know, like, are we assuming that they're not going to do so? Are we assuming that like they're going to be bad forever? Like if that's the case, then would we want to like even be more incentivized to make sure that they don't get on a level playing field? Like
Yeah,
that's
there are a lot of
the
incentives
case.
there, but there's another component that's a really big problem, is there's no way to enforce that de-escalation. So like ironically, one of the benefits of nuclear stockpiles and is that it's like so visible. It has such a maintenance cost, and it is so you can have foreign investigators come and check up on each, like during the Cold War, Russian and American we form joint groups that can go and can investigate the nuclear stockpiles of each country to confer if the treaty is being upheld. And there isn't like an analogous situation that you can really do when it comes to cyber attacks, because these can just exist on any computer anywhere, be developed on any computer anywhere. There's no way to actually ensure that even if some super awesome agreement is made, that anyone is actually holding to it.
Yeah, so then I guess what I suggested before, in which people did not talk about it, and I'm interested in what you guys have to say about it, which is the decentralized internet.
I don't know what that means in relation to this or how it would matter.
Well, do you at least know about like what Russia says they're gonna do with the internet? Like they cut themselves off from.
I mean,
the
you
world
can great
internet.
firewall yourself, but like the internet is still the internet. It connects computers through protocols, and that's still always going to be hackable. I don't know what that. Yeah.
You could isolate. You could go even further than the firewall. You could isolate the entire network of your country and create a parallel, separate network specific to your country, and everything that will run on that network will be basically air-gapped from the rest of the internet.
Yeah, but that doesn't protect you from hacking. That just means someone has to get within your network to hack.
Yeah, anyone who has physical access to your parallel network will still be obviously able to run attacks, but it goes back to how security works in the cyberspace, is that making attacks more difficult is also a part of a viable security strategy. It would be at a huge cost to the freedoms of the people. They would no longer be free to access the rest of the internet, but it would add another layer of complexity to an attack. It
wouldn't even be the freedoms of your people. You'd be kneecapping your entire industrial sector.
A big part of it would be relying on information outside. Though, to be fair, there is something interesting when you look at the internet, for example, in Russia or China or India. Those huge countries, they have developed their own internets. Even though it's all connected, it's all accessible to anyone, whether it's the culture barrier or the language barrier. It makes that it's visible that they basically developed in parallel. So, for example, in the IT world, when I lived in China, I worked on Chinese technology. I was working on WeChat mini apps. The documentation didn't exist in English. I was literally in Google Chrome, like Google translating the pages of documentation to be able to do anything. I once lost like 2 days of work on not being able to like resolve a problem with because the Google Translate was like bad. But the vice versa exists too. Like Chinese developers, they don't use Western code libraries, or when they do, they only use them if someone's translated the Chinese documentation, and they'll usually actually fork the project and have like a Chinese-owned fork of the original project that they'll run in their own like own software development community, rather than using the like Western code base. What I understand is Russia is very similar. They have like their own social media as well. All those things have already developed in parallel, which means that a lot of the industries and the markets already work only within the scope of those societies. So being obviously there would still be great losses from cutting yourself off entirely from like physically from the rest of the internet, but a lot of things would still just continue to work the same way they have worked for the past 10 years.
Yeah, so the general question from Chow was that if you have like this parallel internet or decentralized internet, would that be effective against like hacking attempts?
Well, it would stop the most civilian hacking attempts, like or foreign civilian hacking attempts.
Yeah.
Like I'm trying to hack. I'm trying to like phish people in Russia to get access to their Bitcoin account. I can't. Now I can't. I need to physically go into Russia or have someone in Russia with a mail server that I like fucking call, and they like set up the phishing attack for me, etc., etc. It's like I said, it's the level of complexity of attacks increases. For governments, it will be very easy to go over it. All they need is an agent on the ground that they can communicate with through the normal internet or through normal communication means, and that agent will be able to then release the attack into the parallel internet without any issues. But
so espionage.
Yeah, espionage. Yeah. Which obviously is within means of government agencies. That's like not a big hassle for them. But for like a hacker group, for say like earlier like the Russian hacking group that's been pushing ransomware into hospital computers and stuff like that, they wouldn't be able to do it if the U.S. internet was air gapped. They would need someone physically in the US to continue doing it.
So
I don't.
I just want to ask the clarifying question, like going into our next sponsor, VPN Express. No, just kidding. But our VPNs, are those effective to get into that network, or is that no? You need to be physically there as well, or is like a VPN enough to? Because then I don't think there is like a lot of difference, right? If that
Well,
was the case.
it depends what we're talking about, right? So if we're talking about like a China-style internet with a firewall, then you don't like I have access to Chinese servers like from here. I can go on any Chinese web page. I can look at any Chinese server, like access their IP addresses, etc. That's not an issue. And if I'm inside China, then I need a VPN to access like sites that are blocked by the firewall. It's more from like going in from inside to outside that you need the VPN when it's a firewall situation. And if it's a physical like air gap situation where the internet is actually physically cut off, then the VPN doesn't do anything because the VPN the VPN is literally a tunnel through the internet that then pops out of a server elsewhere.
I don't think it's realistic that any country is ever going to completely cut off its internet from the rest of the world in a scenario like this. Like even China is not this extreme.
Why?
The feat of cutting off all of your infrastructure and rebuilding it would be quite massive. It would be detrimental to all of your information that all of your companies are going to rely on to be able to interact with anything outside of your country. It would be an incredible detriment to any industrial progress that you want to make. It would be like,
Well,
it would be
Russia's
pretty
already
crazy.
getting sanctioned to hell. It's already getting cut
but
off from
you're
the
talking
world.
about like embargoing yourself. You're not just talking about some sanctions. You're talking about cutting yourself off from like all outside trade information. That's gonna your country is gonna run days behind the rest of the world in its access to information, and corporations are never going to be able to be competitive or integrated with the rest of the world systems in a global economy in that situation.
Well, Russia doesn't need to be competitive with the rest of the world if it just doesn't have any access to any of the world's markets. It has
I
to be
mean,
competitive
sure,
with
if
itself.
a country wants to wall itself off and exist on its own, it could do it, but literally no one's going to want to do that. Like,
And to be fair, like if we're talking about Russia, Russia would end up cutting itself off from all the non-aligned nations as well. They would cut themselves off from like India. How would India be able to communicate with like how would Indian companies be then able to communicate with Russian companies, etc. Sorry,
They're gonna make a Russian-friendly internet.
Yeah, but then that's a huge infrastructure cost. Like they need to, they need to put up all the infrastructure once again that's been laid up over the past like 50 years. Put up the like underwater optic fiber stuff. Connect countries.
The only charitable way is you'd have to do like you could make an internet too and have it be all done by satellites, and I don't know. Yeah, you could like maybe do it, circumvent some of the stuff, but like you're still talking about like insane costs for very little benefit, because anything you make that's robust enough to be useful to the global modern economy is accessible enough to be just as vulnerable to hacking.
Yeah, so when they talk about like Russia saying like we're gonna cut ourselves off, it's more like the firewall approach that China already does. That's probably what they are going for, right?
Yeah. They're more talking about like making more like what Name was talking about, having like Russian centric circles of the internet that don't interact as much with the outside world, but it's not like inaccessible.
Okay, that was interesting. I think we covered a lot of stuff, but are there specific things that you guys still want to cover?
Yes. I have
go ahead.
one question
Me as well.
that I'm super curious about that we haven't gotten to. So
So
it seems to
Elysium-
me at the start of the Russian-Ukrainian war that Russia specifically did not engage in cyber attacks against Ukraine. Curious if you guys agree or what you think the reasoning for that was.
Wait, are you saying they did not?
Did not.
Yeah, I thought they did.
Yeah, I read reports that they did, that they that there was
They were taking down government websites. They were targeting banks.
Yeah, exactly.
This was like
Okay.
weeks before the invasion.
Okay, I could be uninformed as to the scale of it, but Okay, so you guys feel like there was a cyber offensive?
Yeah, and I'm pretty sure Russia obviously denied their involvement. And what Naaman also mentioned before, which is what Russia did, is that it was in like some different language, or it was trying to like frame
False
it
flag.
in some other. Yeah, it was a false flag. Not a false flag. But they were trying to falsify who was responsible for it by like putting a message in a different language. I forget which one, but the narrative is that yeah, Russia. This is obviously Russia, and I guess like feeding into that narrative is everybody was saying, oh, before Russia actually invades, they're going to start with a cyber attack. They've done that before, and so they're probably going to do it like that. That was one of the signs that they were going to invade, or preparing to, which they subsequently did.
Okay, later on, if you guys could hit me up with any that haven't, I haven't
I
really
think
seen like any.
I want to just say, like, maybe because this is the difference, maybe they targeted like companies instead of the government. So maybe that's
No,
the
they also
difference.
targeted the government. Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah, that's
so
what I
They
read
also
as
targeted
well.
government websites.
Yeah, okay, because that's if that was the case that they just targeted like companies, I could see that the Elysium had some other, but yeah, Elysium. Go ahead.
Well, I guess I'm not very aware of them. I'd be curious how to hear about them later because I feel like they like avoided bringing the conflict into that area specifically so that their businesses won't be as targeted in something that we're seeing right now.
So you kind of make the assumption that if they did do that, and if they weren't doing that, right? If that they would get um, some pushback from US, like some US cyber attacks, like what? Because there is
Yes.
some implication. Yeah, well, I don't think that because of the fact that they are non-aligned, Ukraine. But yeah, whatever.
You wouldn't get like an official, but you would get the green light for the US to do its own plausible deniability attacks back.
I mean, Elysium is basically saying that okay, this gives the United States the reason of, oh, we're going to react proportionally to what you did.
Yeah, but Elysium is also saying like because he thought that they didn't. He thought that because of that the US was that overarching superpower when it comes to cybersecurity, and that's why they didn't do that. That's what Elysium.
Why they wouldn't want to bring that into that sphere, yeah.
Yes, exactly.
No, they were targeting Ukraine. They weren't targeting the United States, and
yes,
they have targeted the United States before too. The election meddling. I don't the DNC attack, was that Assange or was that Russia?
Well, technically Assange.
Assange.
So technically Assange is the one who released the emails. But what Assange does is he receives like anonymous tips and then just dumps the data. So
it's assumed to be Russia.
Yeah, it's assumed to be Russian hackers. Yeah,
it's always the Russians.
Yeah,
and then Anonymous, like the private hacking group, they've been the ones targeting also Russian companies, as well as even like United States companies that aren't pulling operations out from Russia. I also saw that threat.
Yeah, Elysium, sorry, you wanted to respond?
No, sorry, could you say that again? I didn't quite catch it.
Okay, so Anonymous, the private hacking group, they've been targeting Russian companies as well as even threatening United States-based companies because they're not pulling their operations from Russia.
Nestle.
So it just feels like even like under the belief that Russia didn't do any cyber attacks against Ukraine, there are actors doing cyber attacks against Russia.
Okay. Yeah.
I did have one interesting thing to bring up.
Yeah, I was thinking, but yeah, I forgot my point. But Joe, go ahead then.
Oh, awesome! Yeah, perfect. So in the beginning, Zelensky came out saying that like if there are any civilians that wanted to join like our hacking operations, you can do so. Like he gave out that invitation to the entire world. I want to say in order to like defend or fight against Russia. This is kind of like, I don't know if this is like unprecedented where a government is like, yeah, private citizens, join my cause and whatnot. One, I don't know if it's unprecedented, and two, I want to know if you guys like, are you guys worried about that? Is this a bad precedent? Is this something that we actually shouldn't be doing or like applauding for? Because there's also a risk I think about of, well, what if Russians wanted to use this channel in order to get inside of Ukrainian operations? Kind of like, oh no, I'm not gonna say that. That's gonna get me in trouble.
Yeah, so I know for a fact that like the US, like they hold like conferences when it's talked about like white hack conferences and that kind of stuff, and then or they have like a presence on those sort of types of conference, and then they scout people, and they scout people from all over the world. So yeah, I think being said, like to fight foreign wars, to have like a what you call it, a war, an army that you can join, a foreign legion, right? That kind of stuff. You can make all those decisions, but generally, I wouldn't advocate to even engage in that if on a personal level. But yeah, if you if you want to become an employee for another country to do certain stuff, like yeah, sure, whatever, But yeah, I don't know. What do you guys think? Like, name. What do you think?
Yeah, I guess it is basically like a hacker foreign legion. There is definitely an operational security concern. In like, obviously, it's going to be easier to infiltrate that kind of an organization that's opening its arms to anyone who wants to help. I'm going to assume that they know what they're doing. That they're not like opening up their servers to any rando who just signed up. That they're rather like maybe telling them to do things and seeing if they're capable of doing them, and rather using people than letting those people gain access to privileged information. At least that's how I would think about it if I was in their shoes. I would try to look at the objectives and tasks that I can give out to people that don't cannot compromise anything on my end, and hope they accomplish them with their own resources. I wouldn't be giving resources out to random people either. But I don't know. I don't know what the reality of their program is, like how they organize it. As for diplomatically, it does have like an escalation aspect. But to be fair, they're like, you talked about foreign legion. There is ample precedent historically of countries, whether it's in domestic like civil war situations or in outright war with a foreign country. There's ample precedent of countries receiving support from and calling for like foreign individuals to come help. So I don't know. It's like the same as a foreign legion at that point, really.
Okay, Elysium.
Yeah, I think getting public support or public aid from other countries, even and stuff, is like has a lot of precedent. I don't think it has as much precedent within like cyber attacks or cybersecurity.
No, that's even older. That's even older than just normal foreign legions. No, just kidding.
yeah, good.
Like, of course. Sorry.
Yeah, but I do think this is a novel moment, like the first time that a country has called for other people to openly like just come and help hack another country, for sure.
Actually,
and I don't think it's a good precedent. Go.
Well, no, what you said, it just remind me. We could maybe make an argument that the first instance of something like this happening was the Polish mathematicians and refugees from World War II in the UK who helped develop the Enigma project. They were hackers. They broke Nazi German cryptography using calculating machines in order to advance to further like allied war
They were
interests.
allies. Come on.
They weren't military. They were civilians.
Not yet, yeah.
They were civilians who got
yeah, but it was like from
up...
allied countries.
Yes.
Okay, I know this because of this fucking movie. What is it called? It's
Oh,
probably called Enigma.
Imitation
the
game?
something the
It's
imitation game.
it's imitation games. Yeah, it was like
That's it.
contract.
Okay.
It was contracted with the military, if anything.
That was the UK side. Never mind. Don't worry about it. Yep.
Yeah, that's true.
I think there is a distinct difference. I could agree that that could be like the first like civilian hacking. Maybe yeah. That'd be pretty funny. But I think there's a difference between like a government-led organization or like government-led effort that's in conjunction with that they have like some oversight and control over, and the like very loose civilians doing what they deem to be appropriate, where you don't have very much control over how it could escalate or what targets or what people target or what people think is the correct thing to do. That's kind of where I get the more negative view of such a call, of just it being too broad, too escalatory, and too prone to how fucking stupid people are.
Yeah, one thing to go in that direction as well, like you can very easily see people successfully execute a hack and handle the results of the hack in an irresponsible or poor manner. I was just reading an article about a Ukrainian hacker who actually had an in on like a Russian group's communications. They had managed to like basically have access to their computers or their communications. And that hacker in question had been working as a whistleblower basically for years. They'd been just giving out info to law enforcement whenever there was criminal activity, etc. But because of the invasion, they like got really pissed and they just started dumping all of their data. And the FBI contacted them and asked them to stop, because they are more value when the hackers don't know that they've been compromised than when all this data just being dumped out into the public.
Yeah.
Okay, Chow, does that answer your question?
Yeah, it kind of does. Elysium did mention that this was unprecedented, but he didn't really give out like his thoughts, or maybe just fence sitting.
No, I think it's unprecedented in the lack of oversight that government has over that call, and I think that's bad. I think
Okay, you
that's
think
there's
that's bad?
a strict negative. Yeah, I think it's a bad precedent of like if a country is engaged in a bad action, we'll just say that like it's a green light for any civilian around the world to start engaging in hostile actions towards them.
Okay. Yeah, that being said, the first hacking attempt was the Trojan horse itself.
True.
Troy,
yeah,
the
okay,
first hack. Yeah, okay.
The Trojan horse was social engineering to the max, So there you go.
Is that why it's called a Trojan horse? The virus?
Yep. Yes.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Yes. So that being said, like name, do you got anything else that you wanted to bring up?
Not particularly, no.
So I think we're done, unless if Elysium or Chow, if you.
I'm good.
Okay.
I'm good
then
as
it's
well.
all right.
I guess I just want a closing statement, if that's okay.
No.
No?
Sure. So we're gonna give everybody a closing statement. Let's start off with name.
Okay, I want to just use my closing statement. If anyone listening in is really has gotten like more interested in the questions of privacy and security, I would just like to give out some pointers. The EFF, the Electronic Frontier Foundation, is a nonprofit that advocates for proper privacy for individuals and their cyber rights, basically. I would like to point you in that direction. If you're more interested in your own security, then I don't have actually like an exhaustive resource off the top of my head, but the EFF does actually provide guides for like which apps to use that have good encryption, what are the best practices as a consumer of the internet, etc., etc. So I just want to like throw this out there if anyone's interested in like upping their cybersecurity game.
Yeah. That being said, today we're being sponsored by no, just kidding. By Orange Security, no, but Elysium, go ahead.
I don't know. I have a closing. Sorry.
Yeah. Okay. Fair enough. Ciao.
Yeah, Mr. Robot was a good show. It's what carried me throughout this conversation. That's all I know about hacking and whatnot. Mr. Robot. What a thriller. Should have gotten more seasons. But in all seriousness, this was a good conversation, very enlightening. A lot of good insight from two particular people, or one cartoon and one person on this panel. Chin and I are just we're floating here. We're floating here, but we keep our ears open. I'm still like a bit doomer pilled, and I definitely have this definitely does confirm my belief that governments are going to be like really, really wary about each other, as well as private hacking. Especially Russia, now that like Anonymous has come out and been like, yeah, we actually are capable of fucking you up. And then like, even though Elysium believes that it's the United States that's the top dog in cybersecurity, popular culture suggests that it's the Russians. You know, they're really good at this stuff. And then for like a private organization of citizens to just kind of like target them and make them vulnerable and hurt them, does suggest that, damn, yo, private hackers, kind of scary. But if I take Naaman's advice, that'll be good. I'll just keep myself poor and not a target.
Okay. Yeah. So thank you very much. So then we probably are going to wrap it up. But before we do, I want to thank you guys for coming. So we got Jay Chow, we got Elysium, we got Naaman.